if you're trying to get that big book deal of your dreams, right? Or even kind of a big book deal, as the title of this podcast says, like, this is just the start. This is just an option. And there's so many options today in publishing for you. I'm just trying to give you a view into the traditional publishing world so that you understand it and you can sort of play on an evener playing field in this wild, wild world of books. Welcome to Kind of a Big Book Deal. I'm going to start this episode with a story, like I'm hoping to always do. But please note that in addition to this being my very first episode ever, it's also the first episode of a 10-part crash course in traditional publishing. So let's start with the story, shall we? So a few weeks ago, I had a client who landed a book deal. And she was so excited. Obviously, we had worked on her book proposal and she'd gotten her dream literary agent. And she ended up with a great publisher. And she is going to be published by Hay House, which is a publishing company that you might know. And she came to me and she said, Megan, I love, love, love that I got this deal. It's amazing. I'm so excited. I'm even ready to write this book. I'm just really pumped. But I'm kind of just a little bit disappointed, like just a teeny tiny little bit disappointed. And I said, okay, well, why are you disappointed? And she said, well, secretly, I'd kind of wanted to get a deal with Penguin Random House. And I paused and I was trying not to laugh, honestly. I was trying not to laugh on the call because Hay House was bought by Penguin Random House. And so she had gotten the book deal that she had dreamed of. She just didn't think about it that way. And so I share this story because often your publisher isn't really your publisher. So there's a difference in publishing between what's called an imprint and a publisher. So an imprint can be thought of both as like a department or a division within a bigger company and a brand. And that's unique to publishing and it can kind of be confusing, right? And often these imprints are these little brands inside of a bigger brand, for example, Hay House inside of Penguin Random House reflects the company's history. It reflects a consolidation within the publishing industry that's basically been happening for at least the last 100 years. Super interesting, right? So, it often is like almost like a Russian nesting doll of companies that all are, a publisher in name only. So Hay House is a great example. And that's because Hay House was actually founded in 1984 by Louise Hay. It started out as a small independent publisher, but it was acquired by Penguin Random House in 2023, which is probably why my author had no idea that Hay House was actually part of Penguin Random House, right? She had zero idea that that was true. And a lot of people don't realize this sort of effect of like a Russian nesting doll. Another good example of that is Knopf. So Knopf was created by Alfred and Blanche Knopf in 1915. And it was sold in 1960 to, who you guessed it, Random House, right? So that leads us into a really good conversation about what publishers are and what we say when we say publisher, what do we mean? Most of the time, when people are saying publisher and they're talking about traditional publishing, right? So they're not talking about self-publishing, they're not talking about hybrid publishing, they're talking about what we call the big five. And that is, the five companies that most people refer to in the US as traditional publishers. Okay. So these are not the only people that publish within the traditional model, right? There's plenty of publishers out there in the sea and a lot of independent presses that exist outside of this big five. And this big five is basically a bunch of conglomerate companies. So these are really, really big companies. So let's talk about this number five. We're going to start with number one. That is Penguin Random House. Okay. So this is actually formed by a 2013 merger of Penguin, which was then the number two, and Random House, which was used to be number one. Okay. So let's cliff notes that back. In 2013, a little over 10 years ago, Penguin was acquired as a company by Random House to become Penguin Random House, or as we call it, PRH. PRH is owned actually by Bertelsmann, which is a German multinational media company. That's right. The number one American publisher is owned by the Germans. They are huge. They publish over 70,000 digital titles and over 15,000 print titles a year across more than 300 of those imprints, right? So it's really easy to see how my client would have made the mistake thinking she wasn't a Penguin Random House author when really she is both a Penguin Random House author and a Hay House author, because that's her publisher, Penguin Random House, and that's her imprint, Hay House. Okay. So other imprints you might know, other brand names, right, or departments within Penguin Random House that you might be familiar with include Portfolio, Putnam, Viking, and like a million others, right? There are so many PRH, imprints. So the second largest publisher on this big five is HarperCollins. So HarperCollins was established in 1817. It is currently owned by Rupert Murdoch. That's right. Also, ironically, even though HarperCollins is the only publisher that is owned by, the owner of Fox News, it's also the only publisher that has a union, that has a unionized labor force. Now, not everybody at HarperCollins is in the union, but I think it's pretty remarkable that that company is number two, has a labor union, and is owned by Rupert Murdoch, right? So compared to Penguin Random House, they are considerably smaller. So HarperCollins publishes about 10,000 books per year through about 120 imprints. So they have a global reach just like Penguin Random House does. But if you think about Penguin Random House publishing 15,000 and then Harper publishing 10,000, that's kind of a step down, right? It's definitely a smaller publisher and less books coming out, which isn't always a better or bad thing, right? So imprints at Harper that you might know include Harper One, Harper Business. Do we notice a pattern there? And Harlequin. That's right. The bodice rippers. They come from HarperCollins. And Harlequin was a recent acquisition, right? So we see this pattern. Okay, so number 3 is Simon & Schuster. So I have to admit Simon & Schuster is my favorite, probably because it was the place that gave me an opportunity when I was a baby intern 20 years ago. It was founded by Simon and by Sue Schuster in 1924. So it's 100 years old as of 2024. It used to be owned by Viacom and CBS, and so it was once owned by Les Moonves. When I worked there, we were invited to, holiday celebrations with the staff of MTV. That got spun off. I feel like in the early odds, it got spun off from Viacom. They split it. Very similar to what's happening right now with like cable companies kind of casting off anything that's not on streaming. SNS now, Simon & Schuster is often referred to as SNS within the industry. SNS now has been sold to private equity, which I actually think is good because it allows them to be a little more nimble and you don't have sort of the shareholder pressure. Simon, comparatively to PRH and Harper, is much, much smaller. They only publish around 2,000 titles annually, and they only have a handful of imprints. So they're actually pretty small, even though they're, one of the more premier publishers in the US. They have a very famous office right across the street from Radio City and like in Rockefeller Center. And so, it's really interesting how marquee they are, and yet they only publish 2,000 titles. So imprints you might know from Simon & Schuster include obviously Simon & Schuster, but also Scribner, Atria, and the newish Simon Element. So fun story about SNS is that when Richard Simon and Lincoln Schuster founded the company, they did it because they wanted to publish crossword puzzles, which were super popular at the time and were only available in newspapers. And so they created like this crossword compendium that I'm sure you've seen in like grocery markets. They were the first people to sell that. And I actually had a chance to work on those crossword puzzles when I was an assistant, which was really exciting. And it's kind of cool just to be as part of that legacy, as being someone who got to shepherd those books into fruition and send my mom a lot of crossword puzzle books. So number 4 in this big 5 is Hachette. So I'm going to probably mispronounce this because I did not take French in school, but it is Hachette Livre. I'm just doing my best Emily in Paris impression of Sylvie, Hachette, Livre, a French media conglomerate, right? And that goes all the way back to 1826. So Hachette is basically the sort of like an evolution of a lot of different publishing companies that I don't even know. I didn't dig into the whole past, but like it definitely has evolved to be this. They publish about 15,000 titles a year across 200 imprints in various genres. So imprints you might know at Hachette include Little Brown, Basic, Grand Central, and Workman. So that's number 4. So let's do a quick recap because I know this can get really confusing. So number 1, the behemoth, Penguin Random House. Number 2, HarperCollins. Number 3, Simon and Schuster. Number 4, Hachette. And skating into the big 5, mostly when Penguin and Random House merged, is a company called Macmillan. And so Macmillan before was always sort of treated like on the bubble of the big 5. No one could really tell. And, there used to be like, I'm sure that at some point there was like the big 6 or the big 7, but everyone, since I've been in publishing for the last 20 years, has referred to it as the big 5. And it was always a question of whether like Macmillan or Hachette made the cut. Now that Penguin and Random House combined, it's much easier to make that determination. They both make the cut. So Macmillan was originally established in the UK in 1843. It is now owned by the German Holtzbrink Publishing Group. So that's kind of cool. So imprints that you might know include St. Martin's Press, FSG, Holt, and Flatiron Books. So famously, Macmillan used to be in the Flatiron building. And so I remember when I had a girlfriend that worked at St. Martin's Press, we actually got to go up into the point of the Flatiron building. And it kind of had that very New Yorky, like you work in this epic building, but you also are never like at a comfortable temperature. So it's kind of fun just to think about that. And a lot of these publishers, like you can like walk past them in New York City right now, right? Penguin Random House is in Midtown along Broadway, and I think 57th is the cross street. And then Simon & Schuster is at 1230 Avenue of the Americas. That is a address I will never forget because I had to put it on so many things. And so they're all just right there. It's kind of cool. HarperCollins is over on the east side. I want to say at 55th and 5th. I could be wrong about that. You're just asking me to recall these things off the top of my head. Not something I researched was the addresses. I just think that's kind of cool. So that is the big 5. Let's go over that one more time. So number 1, Penguin Random House. Number 2, HarperCollins. Number 3, Simon & Schuster. Number 4, Hachette Books. And number 5 is Macmillan. Also, I want to throw in some honorable mentions. These are independent publishers that get a lot of attention and that often literary agents submit to when they are, sending projects out to get a deal. That includes Wiley. That includes Barrett Kohler. They both do a great job with business books and with books on education, like books for teachers. There's also a handful of upstarts that are working not necessarily in a traditional model. And we're going to talk about that and how that works and like why do publishers pay advances and all of that in future episodes. But there are some people that are traditionally published veterans who've started their own companies that offer a revenue share model. So they're not paying you in advance, but they're definitely like paying out the profits. So that includes Ben Bella, that includes Authors Equity, which was actually created by a former CEO of Penguin. And Regalo Press is another one that recently our client was very happy to land with. Every publisher, I want to make a note that every publisher can do a good job, but you're going to hear me say over and over and over again. I know this is just the first episode, but I'm going to say over and over and over again that ultimately your success and your happiness as an author is going to depend on what you want, not sort of what the industry dictates, right? So you lead first as the author, and what you're going to be happy with, what you are going to define as successful is really in your hands, right? It's going to be decided by some capitalist things like how big your platform is, how big the audience is, what's the publisher think they're going to sell? And we're going to go into all of that in future episodes. But I just want you to really understand that in this world, if you opt into it, if you're trying to get that big book deal of your dreams, right? Or even kind of a big book deal, as the title of this podcast says, like, this is just the start. This is just an option. And there's so many options today in publishing for you. I'm just trying to give you a view into the traditional publishing world so that you understand it and you can sort of play on an evener playing field in this wild, wild world of books, right? Understanding publishing is sort of like understanding the offside rule in professional soccer or football, in that, like, you don't get it until you get it. And then once you get it, things start to make sense. So remember, this is just episode 1 of a 10-part crash course in traditional publishing. So listen to future episodes. And until next time, cheers to your success.